Hey everybody, so this is kind of old news at this point, but I haven't gotten a chance to do a video on it, so I'm going to do a video on it now, and that is the Anaheim Ducks have fired head coach Randy Carlyle. Anaheim's having a terrible season this year, and while they really held on pretty well at the beginning of the year, and they were in a playoff spot for a while, they've had multiple really long losing streaks this year. And the last one has really just dropped them out of any sort of playoff contention, and they're down to last place in the Pacific Division now, worse than even LA in the standings. This team is in real bad shape, and so yeah, a coaching change. This is not surprising at all to see Carlisle get canned. It was either going to happen now or it was going to happen at the end of the season. He was all done. And it's not necessarily his fault what's going on in Anaheim. I think they have a lot of shortcomings on their roster. I don't think it's necessarily a coaching issue, but I do think it was time to move on and probably get a different coach in there and start somewhat of a rebuild or a retooling in Anaheim. So if you take a look, the Ducks have played 56 games this year. They're 21, 26, and 9. 51 points, which is tied with LA for last in the Pacific Division, but they're lower than LA in the standings because they have less wins. They are 2-8-0 in their last 10 games, so only 2 wins in 10 games. That's obviously terrible, and they're on a 7-game losing streak. This is obviously dark times for the Anaheim Ducks, who for the past decade or so have been a consistent playoff team and at times a Stanley Cup contender. They haven't necessarily made it as deep into the playoffs as they would have wanted every year, but they've had some very, very good playoff series, particularly with the Nashville Predators, and they've been a consistently good team year in and year out. This year, everything's kind of fallen off the map. And I saw this coming back at the beginning before the season started. When I did my predictions, I said Anaheim is not going to make the playoffs this year. And I think it really started for them in this offseason, where they did absolutely nothing this offseason to get any better. They didn't have a great year last year. They had a very strong push at the end of the year last season, which pushed them up into a top 3 spot in the Pacific. But overall, they didn't look all that great last year. They're an old team. They're a team that's severely on the decline, and you could see this coming from a mile away with the Ducks. You have Corey Perry, who's extremely overpaid. You have Ryan Getzlaf, who's extremely overpaid. You have Brian Kessler, who's extremely overpaid. And these are all older players who don't produce nearly enough for what they're being paid at this point. They're all in their mid-30s. Their play as a whole has severely declined. They're not guys who are going to lead a team to the playoffs anymore unless they have a really good supporting cast. And when you have so much money tied up in those 3 guys, it's hard to put a good supporting cast around them, and Anaheim doesn't have that at this point. Now, certainly there are some good pieces in Anaheim. I really like Rickard Rakell, and he's still a pretty young guy. But overall, this is a very old team. This is a team that doesn't have really any sort of spectacular talent coming up through the ranks, because they've been so good for so long. They're not getting high-end first-round draft picks. They're not picking in the top 10. They're picking in the 20s in the first round. So it's hard to retool and get really good young talent in the system when you're picking that late in the rounds in the draft. And unless you hit a home run with a late first-round pick, it's hard to get really high-end talent in there. So this has been coming for Anaheim, and I think this team, this core, this Anaheim Ducks group, I think has run its course. They've been together for a while now, and Getzlaf and Perry have been there for years. And it's just it's time. I don't think they necessarily need to rebuild completely, but I do think they need a couple years to retool. I'm not saying that they're going to have to be like Buffalo or Carolina and go through, almost 10 years of being absolute garbage for them to get any better. But I do think it's going to take a couple of bad seasons this year, next year, maybe another year to get, some young talent in there and start to retool this team a little bit. They have a great goaltender in John Gibson, who's just at this point been completely overworked. They have some really good pieces there. I love Josh Manson. I think Brandon Montour's a good player. Cam Fowler's having a terrible year this year, but he's a good player. Ricard Raquel I love. I think Andre Casso, if he can stay healthy, has a lot of potential. They have some good pieces there, but as a whole, they're too old, they're too slow, and they're a team that needs to rebuild a little bit here. So Carlyle's gone. The Ducks are in really bad shape, but the good news for them is they have a chance to get a really, really good draft pick in this year's draft, and that could really be a big-time stepping stone into getting them back to where they were even just 2 or 3 years ago. All they need is, they're going to need a couple of those young, high-end players, and if they can hit on those draft picks, then it could be a very quick rebuild and turnaround for the Anaheim Ducks. So with Carlyle gone, Bob Murray, the GM, is actually stepping in to be the interim coach for the rest of this season. And this is something I wanted to talk about because this is interesting. You don't see this nowadays anymore. This is a very old school thing to do. Something that you would have seen, I think, a lot more in the 70s or the 80s is, the coach gets fired and the GM comes down out of the press box to actually coach. And that's an old school hockey thing, and I'm a big fan of old time hockey, old school hockey. So I find this really interesting because you just don't see it anymore. Generally, the front office people and the coaching, like, those are two separate things. You don't see them mixing a lot. You don't see a lot of people, going from being front office guys to being coaches, and you don't see a lot of coaches leaving coaching to go be in the front office. You see that a little bit more than the other way around, certainly, but it's just a very old school hockey thing to have those two sides intermingle. When you look at some of the new school GMs in the NHL, the analytic guys, the guys like Kyle Dubas and Toronto, and the kid in Arizona, Chaka, whatever his name is, I forget his name off the top of my head, but you would never see them coaching a hockey team. They would never coach a hockey team or be behind the bench. They are numbers people up in the press box, and it's interesting for me to see a GM step down, well, not step down, but come down from the press box and actually coach the team. And that's what Bob Murray is going to do for the rest of this year, and I just find that fascinating because that's not something that you see very much nowadays. Generally, you see players when they want to stay in hockey, and they either pick coaching or they pick front office, and they go those are like diverging streets, and you can't intermingle, but you can't mix them. It's either you go to the front office or you go to coaching, and that's kind of your direction. You don't see a lot of GMs coaching or coaches going to GM. It doesn't happen all that often anymore. Not like it used to back in the old days. So I think, Bob Murray's been around hockey for a long, long time. He is an old school guy, so I'm not really surprised that he, of all people, would be one to do this because he is an old school guy, and he, I think, wants to see, by the GM coming down and coaching, it gives him a front row seat to everything that's going on the day-to-day aspects of the team. The GM can be a little bit more removed from the day-to-day of the team and being in the locker room and stuff like that. The GM's not really a part of that. But now that he's the coach, he's going to get to see the inner workings of this team on a daily basis. He's going to see what's going wrong, what's going right, who might need to be moved, who should be kept. There's a lot that you can learn by being the coach, even if you're also the GM. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what Anaheim does. I don't think there's necessarily a quick fix here because Getzlaf, Perry, and Kessler are all still under contract and all at huge cap hits. So until those contracts either get moved or bought out or somehow dealt with, I think it's going to be a pretty tough go for Anaheim. It's going to be hard for them to add high-end free agents. But again, there are some pieces there. I think in another couple of years, if they do this retool right, they can be right back being a contending team like they were before. I think they've been so good for so long that they're just going through a stretch here where they're not going to be good, and they're going to get some really good draft picks out of it. And maybe that next generation of players will come up and maybe be the next Ryan Getzlaf and the next Corey Perry and the next, Chris Pronger or Scott Niedermayer, type defenseman that they used to have. So, we'll see. But, yeah, Anaheim, Carlyle's gone. They're having a terrible year. And I think they're probably going to finish, if not in last place in the Western Conference, in the bottom 3 of the Western Conference for sure. So, rough year for the Ducks. But I saw this coming. If you go back, watch my predictions at the beginning of the year, I didn't think they'd be this bad, but I had Anaheim missing the playoffs. I saw this coming. Just too old, too slow, and not enough, young talent on this roster. So, with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media, check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links are down in the description below. If you'd like to further support this channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.